Hello and welcome to On the Bench, the fortnightly podcast for scale modelers by scale modelers. Available on iTunes, Stitcher, and all good podcast apps. While you're there, don't forget to mark us as your favourite so that you never miss a show. Fine Scale Modeler is proud to be the official supporter of On the Bench. Fine Scale Modeler is one of the world's most recognised modelling magazines and can be found in all good newsagents or wherever you purchase your magazines. Alternatively, you can go directly to their website, www.finescale.com, and subscribe to get the magazine home delivered, as well as access to their digital edition. Hello and welcome to Season 3, Episode 43 of On the Bench. This episode is going to be a little bit different. Unfortunately, due to my work commitments, I've been called away to assist the fire services with the ongoing fires that we're having here in Victoria. We've had a rather hot summer, unseasonably hot, with temperatures getting up around 45 degrees Celsius. And as a result, we've got quite a few fires burning on the landscape. So I'm heading off tonight to do a 4-day shift in a very remote part of Victoria. But rather than leave you, the listeners, without anything, I thought I'd dive into the archives and have a look at some of our more memorable interviews that we did and replay them again. Of course, when I'm back, I'll be back in the studio with the boys. We've got a heap of new products to look at, including a lovely rocket that we got from Horizon Models. And I know there's a listener out there who's very keen to get his hands on it. He won it in a competition, an impromptu competition that I ran on Facebook. So he's the lucky winner of that. Sorry to say, I'm going to have to hang on to it for another week because I need the boys to sort of have a look at it as well before we post it off to you. But anyway, that's the situation. I hope you can understand and bear with us, and I also hope that you enjoy diving back into some of these more interesting interviews that we had in our past. So the interview we've got for you today is an old one, way back from episode 9. We've got Chris Dowset into the studio, along with Ian. Unfortunately, Julian wasn't around. I've got no idea where Julian was that day. Never mind. We were talking about paints and also having a chat about weathering. So I hope you enjoy this flashback to episode 9. And welcome back, and we're going to be having a bit of a chat about paints and to use in your modelling every day building. Of course, when I first started modelling, I'm pretty sure you guys are the same. The only real choices you had were Humbrol and maybe
Revell
or Testers. I think.
Testers, yes,
yeah.
in the little glass bottles.
Yeah, and of course they were enamels, weren't they?
Yep.
Nothing but enamels.
Yep.
Gee, things have moved on since then, haven't they?
Indeed. A lot more water base out there now, which is a lot better for the modeller, and it's a much better situation. And there's a lot more choice out there, which is really, really good.
Well, really, the acrylics sort of revolutionised, in my opinion, the paints, the acrylics and the lacquers.
Yep.
And it's just been an explosion of manufacturers in recent years. I mean, look at, what's his name? The Mig.
Mig's got his own paint range.
So his own paint range now. Model Air,
Vallejo,
SMS, Citadel paint ranges.
Yep. For the automotive people, you've got Gravity paints,
yes,
and Zero paints, which do a lot of the proper automotive colours.
Yep.
Pre-mixed for the...
Pre-mixed, with and the metallics apparently are done with very finely ground metallic particles, so you get the good scale effect.
So let's have a chat first of all about enamels. And so enamels, although they're still popular with some, I think they're starting to sort of
their days are waning.
Yeah, the days are numbered for sure. And of course, you've got all the mucking around with enamels as well, and you've got the issue of it drying out
and the smell. And
if you paint indoors like I do, even though I use a paint booth, Using enamels indoor doesn't endear yourself to the significant other, does it?
No. No.
Yeah, the acrylics nowadays are so much better, and the range is there as well. And you got the choice. Me personally, I like Guns paints, and I've invested a lot of it into Guns.
Same. Mind you, I'm very disappointed lately, and I think there's a lot of modelers out there probably having the same issue with their flat clear, which is, I've spoken to a few modelers, and I've found it myself, you start spraying, it leaves white spots behind.
Oh, really?
It's very interesting you mention
it's like
that.
It goes off. You use it the first time you use it, it's fine. You put the bottle aside, you use it a couple of weeks later, and you start spraying your flat clear, and all of a sudden you lose all white spots everywhere.
You get bad batches of paints. All paint manufacturers have some sort of bad batches every now and then, but it comes down to their own quality checking, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah.
Or lack of.
Yeah, lack of quality control.
Or lack of quality control.
Yep.
Yeah. But I think for me, the thing that really sort of revolutionised everything for me was the straight out of the bottle, pour it straight into the into your airbrush and just go.
Yeah.
You didn't have to worry about thinning it or mixing it or anything like that. And that's been an absolutely huge boon, I think. And, I mean, even to the point now where paint manufacturers will just sell paints for a particular camouflage design, like RAF 1940, for example.
Yes.
And you get, a little sort of box of about 4 to 5 paints and bang, off you go. I think Life Colour was one that started that.
If you like live colour paints, myself, I'm not a fan.
I don't have issue with Life Colour.
I can't. It's like spraying sand, mate.
No, this is an interesting little sort of subject because I found that when I use Life Colour, I had to make sure I was using the Life Colour thinners as well. If I tried to use a different type of thinner...
I'd just coagulate.
I'd get sort of issues like you're talking about, like it comes out like, fine grains of sand and all that type of stuff.
And that was even with me using their...
Oh, really?
Their thinners. Yeah, I hate it. I gave it all away.
No, I don't mind at all.
Take it off my hands. I don't want this crap anymore.
That's interesting you mention that because a lot of modelers have personal preference.
Yep.
Because some modelers purely like doing enamels, and you got the Life Colour issue here, and some people don't even like Guns. I love Guns.
Yeah.
It depends on how you paint and what you're doing. The particular modeler, I suppose.
Yeah, and Guns has recently released I think another 10 colours, which look a lot like, there's a few colours in there that look like they might be useful for someone's doing wingnut kits.
Good.
But if you do wingnut kits, you really can't go past drooling bulldog paints.
Never used it.
They're from, I think, Belgium.
Yeah.
They're from, and they're actually using the proper paint schemes, the proper paint codes, and so you can get your PC10s and your different reds.
Didn't the Germans use lacquers?
Yeah, and they are a lacquer.
Yeah, so
when you put their paint like their red over the top of a bare metal cowl, it comes up like candy apple.
Oh,
which is, then you think about it, these aircraft back in the day.
Yeah,
would have been really striking, some of the paint jobs.
Oh, absolutely.
And being a lacquer, a lot of the wood grain and fabric surfaces sort of shown through as well.
Correct, yeah.
It's regarding that sort of item, I'm going off the track a little bit, but talking about lozenge camouflage.
Yeah.
And with the New Zealand fellas, when they were restoring or building from new, but the old aircraft from World War One.
Yep.
What they were doing with the lozenge camouflage was basically hand painting it, and they were getting a good result, and that was all fine. But then they started to screen print it because lozenge was originally screen printed.
Okay.
So first off, they started with the wing, and they would put the covering over the wing. Then they would paint it by hand. Then they started going back to the original way of doing it properly, which was the fabric, and then they would screen print it and then attach it to the wing. And by doing that, they actually found out the lozenge made the fabric stronger. And it was able to flex, but also strength.
Yep.
So they found out their aircraft was actually flexing and being stronger and working better in the air. And they were blown away by their... Going back to the old ways of doing things. And that's what they're doing with the New Zealand aircraft manufacturing, with these old World War I aircraft.
So when I was first doing modelling, of course, I had the enamels, but then I started using Tamiya paint as I sort of managed to get more pocket money as I was getting older and older. And Tamiya was sort of the mainstay for me for many, many years.
Right, yep.
And, Tomei used to produce a huge different range of colours and everything, and still today, if I open up my my little paint sort of store, there's lots of tomato paint still in there, and they still function quite well and do a great job.
I use I've got a couple of tomato paints myself, and they're actually really good in their matte range. I don't have the gloss range per se, but I've got them in the matte range. So if I want to paint an acrylic paint on a armour vehicle or aircraft that I want matte, and I don't want to put a matte finish over the top, I just pull out some of the paints I've got sitting there, and they work beautifully. They really do.
I guess we're missing sort of the big elephant in the room when we're talking about paints is what goes underneath it. And I know Ian and I have sort of circled around this discussion before about whether to
undercoat or
to
not
do undercoat or not. I'm one who does like to undercoat, and
very rarely.
And I can't beat the old Tomeo rattle can undercoat or what's the other one? The Guns, not the Guns. It's like a microfiller one. You get it in 1,000 or 500.
The Guns.
The Guns one, yeah. And
Mr. Surfacer.
That's right, Mr. Surfacer. That's what I was trying to think of. Thanks. And I can't recall not having or using a undercoat at all when I'm doing a paint. With the exception, I think, I've tried, and I think you've done this too, Chris, some of the metal finishes. You haven't done an undercoat, you've just done straight onto the actual kit itself.
Oh, the Alclad.
Alclad, yeah.
Yeah, with the Alclad. I've done a couple of aircraft in the natural metal, and on a particular Alclad paint, which is, I think it's aluminium, I've painted directly onto the plastic. Make sure the plastic is cleaned down. So the aircraft is, because I've done 2 aircraft. I build them, I clean them up, make sure that they're spot on.
Highly polished, the material highly polished.
Well, I wouldn't polish the material, the plastic. This is basically it's been glued, it's been finished, it's been filled. I would go over it with a little bit of sandpaper and just make sure that, well, number one, the surface is spot on perfect, because you're putting a silver finish over the top and it will show up any imperfections. So you've got to make sure that it is perfect. And then once you've gone over it, go over it again and make sure those areas are finished. Now, once that's been done, I would then wipe it down, clean it, get a sponge with a little bit of soapy water and just clean the surface, and then some glass cleaner little rags you get from the optometrist, and sort of just wipe over the kit, make sure it's really, really clean, and then I'll go start painting. Now, when I paint in levels and very small spurts of paint. So I might do a very, very small amount of paint on first and let it dry and let it bite in. And then once that's done, then start building up the coats. I seen a lot of fellas do this a similar sort of finish, but they do a undercoat. And me personally, I think some of the undercoats are a little bit too heavy, and they can get rid of the finish underneath. And I'm actually working with the plastic, getting a finish through the paint. The plastic is actually coming through the paint. I'm actually working with the plastic as well. Because
for a long time, I mean, and even today, you'll see people talking about Alclad, and they'll say you have to have a gloss black put down first. So
for the chromes, that of course you do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you need something that's going to give that reflective surface.
Yeah. Saying that, with my gloss colours, like the chromes, for undercarriage, I use their Alclad chrome. I hand paint or spray, airbrush, enamel black. I don't use their particular black. I just use a Humbrol.
I just use Guns.
Yep, that's fine. I just use a Humbrol enamel and then put the chrome on top, and that works nicely. But only on the chrome. I don't seem to do it on the other colours.
And the paint that I've recently come across, which I absolutely love, it just goes down so beautifully, is the Mr. Paint.
Right.
That comes in bottles that you can pour straight in, and it's ready to use and ready to go straight away. And it is a sensational little paint. Just comes straight out of the airbrush. It's really forgiving with your airbrush pressures as well. So if you get it down a little bit too low or a bit too high, it's not as sort of bad as, say, if you're using life colour, where that's really going to be zoned in and dialed right in at a particular pressure for that. But Mr. Paint just goes on beautifully, and it just dries so quickly, and it's a
They
fantastic.
usually just pour straight from the bottle into your cup, or you?
Yeah, straight from the bottle into the cup, and off you go.
Yeah, because I recently, I haven't got them yet. I ordered them. Bought 100 pipettes
Oh, they're a godsend.
from China. 100.
They're an
Cost
absolute
me
godsend.
$1.05
Yep,
shipped
yep.
for 100 pipettes. So,
Yep.
yeah, well,
And with my pipettes, because they're so darn cheap now, I'll just use one pipette for a painting
colour,
session and
yep,
just throw it
throw
away.
it out, yeah.
Yep.
that's what I'm planning on doing.
Yep.
No more having to wipe down the bottles and.
Or no more having to sort of gently pour out the paint into the cup of
Yep.
your airbrush.
Yep.
None of that sort of mucking around.
Getting away from that now.
Yeah, absolutely. So, do any of you guys still use enamels at all?
Nah.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Black enamel for underneath the chrome, but I'm pretty much moved away from it. So I've still got some the old Humbrol sitting there.
Mind you,
And I
sorry,
use it.
yeah, I like you. Yeah, the only colours I use is their aluminium and the gunmetal.
Okay.
The polishable gunmetal, which I reckon is a great colour.
Yeah.
The polishable gunmetal from Humbrol. Otherwise, I stick with guns.
It's good paint. I also use, because I've still got the paints there and they're quite a few years old, I use them up on bases. So when I'm doing bases for the kits, some groundwork and things like that, so I just use the colours on that. Make sure I use them all up.
I think I've got some specialist enamels, and I'm thinking there's a manufacturer, a cottage industry one that's specifically for Australian armour, and it's called Mouse House. You guys have probably heard of
Yeah,
it, but I don't know
Mouse
whether
House,
our listeners have. But they did the three colours for the Ozcam camouflage, and they came out in enamel, and they were specifically paint matched, so you can get the right tones and everything for doing Australian armour. So I think that's about the only enamels I've got sort of sitting around in my room.
Yep.
I can't think of any others that I've got.
No, we've all progressed.
Yeah, absolutely. Citadel colours. Citadel for a long time obviously were used for the Warhammer stuff, and a lot. I think that's where the first sort of airbrush, air ready sort of stuff migrated from. Am I right there in saying that?
Oh, could be.
I'm pretty sure.
Could be.
I don't know.
I know their regular paint you can't airbrush.
No.
It just dries straight away.
Yep.
As soon as it leaves the airbrush.
And that's another interesting aspect too. Some paints are readily sort of you can brush it, and other paints just don't like being brushed at all.
Yep.
Whereas some like being airbrushed, and other paints, you have awesome all sorts of.
Oh yeah.
different-
Well, I can testify. I can't hand paint bloody guns.
yeah,
That stuff's impossible to hand paint.
yeah. Although you got to say, is it designed to be hand painted or not?
No, it's airbrush paint.
It's an airbrush paint, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
That's what you buy your Vallejos for. If you want to hand
Vallejos.
paint, buy Vallejo.
Yeah,
yeah, and all Warhammer as well. Warhammer's a nice paint to hand paint because that's designed to be hand brushed as well.
And plus, I reckon the Citadel paints usually have the best metallics.
absolutely. So, if any of you guys had any luck with lacquers, I know, Chris, you were talking about lacquers before in regards to painting sort of like World War I German aircraft. Have any of you guys actually used lacquers yet?
Oh, I've used lacquers a few times, not like large projects, but a few times. I haven't had a problem with them,
Yeah.
except for the smell.
Me personally, I haven't used a lacquer as yet.
Yeah.
No. Once I start getting into some World War I aircraft, I might start investigating
Yeah, you
lacquer.
Your KO 61. That's L-clad.
Okay.
L-clad's
It's a
a
lacquer.
lacquer.
Ah, there we go.
Yeah. So you have used lacquers,
There we go.
and you got a good finish out of that too.
Storage of paints. How do we store our paints?
In basically a little paint storage rack I bought.
Yeah.
Just something cheap from the $2 shop that you can fits me guns paints in. It's got 4 drawers, and I just keep it in that.
So you're not worried about drying out or anything like that?
Yeah, I get a bit concerned about paints drying out.
Fridge then.
I prefer to keep my paints in a timber box, which I got from a second-hand shop, and I went down to Bunnings and picked up some MDF and a drill bit, which was the same size as the guns little jars, and then I drilled out 100 of these little holes, and then they
She
stick
must
in
have
there
been a
quite
big
nicely.
drill bit.
Yeah, circle cutters.
Oh, circle cutters,
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, so circle cutter. And cut them all out, and fits in there quite nicely. And being timber, it sort of keeps it the temperature down. And I try and keep that little box away from the sunlight in the through the window. So it keeps the paints in really good condition.
There's some little devices you can buy now, which you can strap the bottle down, and it's like a shaker.
Yes.
It does the shaking for you. And some paints will actually come with like a little ball bearing in it. So
Yeah, I you can buy the ball bearings separate. I do that with all my Vallejo. I just bought a couple of bags of ball bearings.
Yeah.
And stuck a ball bearing in each pot.
Yep.
Helps with the mixing when you shake the crap out of it.
That's a really good idea, Ian. Yeah. And I know you do the same thing with the Alclads as well.
Yeah.
It's a really good idea.
Put a ball in there, makes it mix a lot better and easier.
The other thing too that I find is quite helpful is nothing more frustrating. You spent $8 or something on a particular paint pot, and it's got it's a glass paint pot, and it'll have the plastic lid, and of course you get the paint drying on top. So what I find to do is if I get a little bit of Vaseline and just put it around the top, so that way when I screw down, the paint's not going to lock on it or bind. So it's much like when you put a oil filter in a car, you put a bit of oil around the ring there so you can get the oil filter on and off again quite easily. Because it's intensely frustrating when you go to open a paint jar and it's jammed, and the only way you can get it off is by brute force. And of course, you either break the glass jar, or you break more importantly, the plastic cap that goes on it. So I find just a little bit of Vaseline in there on the top, when you finish with it, and it just makes
Gunn's
sure.
bought out a tool for that. It's like a little cup you put your bottle in. You got like this big spannery thing you put over the top and unlocks it. I bought one of them.
I will be getting one of those.
Very handy.
What I do with the Guns paints at the moment, I just get a very small flathead screwdriver and just sort of put it up into the gap and sort of just twist a little bit, and then go around the other side and then twist that, and that sort of just jimmies it out, and then you just unscrew it yourself.
Oh, cool. All right.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's about it for paints, and that leads us into our next segment, in which we're going to be talking about aircraft weathering, and of course, that's the whole reason why Chris is here. Yeah. So let's roll straight into that, and we'll talk about aircraft weathering. And we're back having a discussion about aircraft weathering, and I know very little about aircraft weathering because I'm mainly a shipbuilder. Of course, no doubt some of the techniques can, be transferred across to other genres, but you two guys are sort of like the gurus in aircraft weathering, so take it away.
Go for it, Chris.
Okay,
that's what we got you here for, mate.
Okay, aircraft weathering. Before you start weathering in any sort of project, you really should check your references. Basically, most modelers pretty much know their subject anyway. Or they might just pick up something and just go, well, I wouldn't mind building this. But the first thing you should do is check your references and really have a good look at the photos and how these things are being used as well. Ground crew would be working on them, where would they be walking, where would be damaged as far as just scuff marks and little things like that. Personally, I don't like to over-weather an aircraft. I know in service they can get really, really dirty, but at the same time, it's a piece of art. I'm creating a piece of art, that's the way I consider it, and a piece of history, so I'm not going to go nuts with the weathering on my aircraft.
Okay, so
personally.
We're talking about weathering. So for listeners out there who don't really understand what the definition of weathering is, what are we talking about when we're saying weathering?
Good question. It's basically, if you started a kit and just painted it and didn't do weathering on it at all, it would look nice, but it would look like a model kit. What you're trying to create is a small, scaled-down version of the real item. How does it look in service if it was in warfare? How does it look in service as it was like it had been cleaned up and being worked on and things like that? So you're creating something that's a small, scaled-down version of the real thing.
So how is weathering different from filtering? What's the difference between the two?
Well, filtering is just changing the tonal values of your paint, whereas weathering is giving an item a used look.
A used look, so knocked around use every day.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah. Rather than shiny, everything's no scuffs or anything on it. Like even the cleanest jumbo jets, you look at the undersurface of a clean jumbo jet, it's filthy.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And especially the World War II aircraft. Oh, and World War One, because the World War One aircraft had
Castor oil. Stuff went everywhere.
Yeah, it went everywhere. So those aircraft got quite dirty. And World War II aircraft, you look at the bottom of a World War II aircraft like a Messerschmitt, and they're filthy. There's oil going right down the underneath the engine area, right through the fuselage and right to the back, to the tip of the fuselage. Now, do you want to do that much weathering? It's up to you personally. But those aircraft got really, really dirty. I even did a P40 a couple of years ago, and that was used in Milne Bay. And I was putting mud on the wheels and underneath because those aircraft were landing in mud and in huge puddles. And it was so I was even adding that, which is I've never done that before. Usually it's just a very, very light coat of dirt over the tyres. So I don't like to put too much. But you've got to know where these things are being used.
Yes, exactly.
So with your weathering, you got I guess you got three sort of influences. You've got the paint being scuffed, worn, chipped in whatever variation that may be. You've got paint being faded.
Yes.
You've got stain marks as a result of lubricants, exhaust stains,
refueling,
weapon stains from guns firing. That's another point. And you got environmental influences on it as well, such as you were saying, in the case you might have dust or even mud on the actual kit, depending on what you're modelling and where it's...
Mould and mildew. Mould and mildew. Look at some of the Pacific campaigns when they got wet. Stuff got mouldy pretty quick.
Well, that's a good point because a lot of surfaces were still canvas covered, like the rudder and the ailerons in some aircraft. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So okay, and this is something that we've always banged on about, and Chris, you sort of reiterated on it, where you've got to actually have good references if you're sort of looking for something. So references are key. So you get your references all set up. And let's say you want to do I'll pick a nice subject matter, a Japanese fighter, and they're renowned for being heavily weathered and sort of chipped and everything. So how do you go about doing that? I mean, because when I look at it, there's two ways of doing it, and you can paint the underneath a silver of the aircraft, and then you put the paint on top of it and sort of chip it off by using different mediums and methods, in which we should talk about those mediums and methods as well. Or do you paint the aircraft the camouflage colour and then apply the chips on top of that? So which way would you go to sort of tackle that subject?
You can go both ways, and it comes down to your references as well, because some Japanese aircraft were delivered in the islands in silver. They were built in silver. The ailerons were painted, but the actual airframe was in silver, and they were delivered with this Hinamaru's on there, and very basic after that. So when they landed, they basically got the ground crews that painted these aircraft. When they were painted in the field like that, most of the times they weren't painted underneath. It was purely just the top camouflage, and it was indigenous paints sometimes as well. Sometimes it was paints that had been brought over. So those particular aircraft got really chipped up. However, then you got other Japanese aircraft which were painted in the factory and then delivered, and they didn't chip up half as much, and they don't chip up as like the American aircraft as well. So you've got to do your references there and understand how, if you really want to get into it, and understand how these aircraft were delivered. Now, if I was going to do a Japanese aircraft really, really chipped up, and I have done that before, which was an aircraft that was in the field and painted indigenous colours, what I started with was knowing where the paint chips were going to go. Is I painted a undercoat in silver, and then I patched that with some tape at that time. Nowadays, I'd probably use a masking fluid, and then paint the camouflage on top of that. Now, once the camouflage is then painted, you're really happy with how that result is finished. You then take away either the tape or the masking fluid, and you've been left with that chipped effect. Now, with that, you add to hand chipping. And there's 2 ways of doing that. You can either paint it with silver paint, say a Vallejo or a Warhammer or enamels with a small brush. And you could do it that way. Or a silver pencil. You can even really do fine chips there as well. And I love the silver pencil. I've got one here today. They're beautiful doing little chips as well. So you work down from the very large chips from the very start, and then you go into the hand painting, and then you finish off with the smaller chips as well. The good thing about weathering aircraft is you can actually hide some imperfections of the aircraft. Once you start putting some paint on there, you can start saying, "Oh, I just didn't quite finish that seam." So you can put some chips next to it, and the eye seems to just glance across it. So you can actually hide little imperfections if you want to make a show winning kit. So it works well that way as well.
And you've built hundreds of aircraft in your time. How do you tackle the weathering side of it?
Well, pretty much the same as Chris does. But sometimes if I want to get like chips in an area close together, I'll use a sponge and just get a bit of the silver colour on the sponge and
just dab it on
there.
Yep.
I tend to usually go two-tonal chips lately. Get like a dark colour and then put a light colour in the centre of it, and that gives you more three-dimensional feel to the paint chip.
Yep.
Rather than actually chip the paint off itself.
Yeah, that shows an undercoat as well, because you have like what's the light green that's
the chromatic green. Yeah, which is good like on US aircraft, and you put a bit of that down on, and then put your silver in between that.
Yep.
And it looks like it's actually rather than just chipped, it's worn away.
Okay.
It's more of a worn look.
So can these methods be sort of transferred across to other genres, like cars, trucks, air, ships, armour?
Yep. Could all be it's all slightly different in a few places, but overall, it's you're using the same techniques.
And there's a range of different methods too, which, I mean, if you go to just type in weathering aircraft or weathering something in YouTube, and you're going to get a whole host of different sort of YouTube videos which will come up and show you the different methods.
Yep.
You were Chris, you were talking about masking before. Salt is another way of doing that, is it not, as well?
Yeah, salt masking.
Salt masking.
Yep.
Ian's even tried Vegemite.
Yeah, I even tried Vegemite.
Seriously?
Good old Vegemite. Work the treat. Work the treat. Vegemite the sponge.
So you put Vegemite down in the kit with a sponge.
Yep. Painted the Panzer grey first, then put the Vegemite on where I wanted the chipping. Painted me Panzer brown, and then when the paint was nearly dry, just washed it under a warm tap.
When you're doing your chipping too, you don't just have an average chip over the whole aircraft.
No.
You've got to know where the chipping effect is being where it's being weathered. So leading edges is one area which it should be damaged up. Around the cockpit area where the crew are loading up weapons and things like that, especially ammunition. Say Hurricane. I know they had some fabric wings, but they had the little hatches were actually metal. They can be chipped up really nicely because the ground crew are trying to turn these aircraft around really, really quickly. So yes, they're being careful when they're loading up this ammunition, the ammunition, and it will hit the surface and then chip it up. So that's when you start looking at where you put your chipping as well. So don't put your chipping all over the whole aircraft. Look at where it's supposed to go. Make sure you don't put paint chips in fabric, of course, because paint seems to sit on fabric really nicely. So metal is a good place.
I tend to look for is areas which are going to be accessed at a regular interval on an aircraft, and they're the places where you're going to have your most chipping.
Access panels, which the guys are opening up all the time.
Exactly, like avionic bays and ammunition bays, hydraulics.
And on leading wings of edges, the paint chips predominantly around the where the closer to the fuselage and less towards the
Wingtip.
the wingtips, because the way aircraft fly through the air is the air hits the main fuselage per se, and then gets pushed out over the wing, and that's where you start getting a lot of paint chips over it. So, the wing tips, you don't put many paint chips on there either. So that's you've got to be careful about that.
So we've spoken a lot about paint chips there. What about other sort of weathering that you'd expect to appear in an aircraft, such as stains, be exhaust, oil, or smoke?
Yeah, well, you get your smoke through your gun barrels.
Yep.
I recently saw some really interesting footage of or photographs of B-25s, Mitchells, and they'd had recently had their gun packs removed. And where the actual blast from those 30 or 50 coals out on the gun packs on the side, it's actually back to bare metal.
Oh,
it's
seriously?
actually burnt the paint back to bare metal.
Wow.
So that's one thing you can look at. You also got your exhaust staining. I usually find German aircraft, I usually go a more blacker exhaust staining because of their inferior fuels compared to the Allies.
Synthetic fuels.
Yeah. As you said, oil stains, fuel stains, you can pop them on where someone's been a bit quick in pulling this nozzle out when they're refueling on the wing.
So what would you use to do your oil stains? What sort of
Oil
medium?
stains? I usually just use the AK oil and fuel stains.
Okay.
You can get in a bottle.
You can also spray that on as well. I've got it in guns. You can get the smoke in guns
And oil.
In oil, yes. Yep. And you can also get similar paints in Tamiya range as well. And you can put that onto an airbrush and just very, very lightly airbrush over these areas. Low pressure. Make sure it's flowing out of the airbrush nicely, because you don't want splatters per se. You want it to come out nice and easy, and then paint it that way. With those particular paints, they're usually a gloss, so you're going to have to go over a matte as well.
Yeah.
But
and
you
with exhaust staining, you've got to look how badly certain aircraft left stains. Some aircraft there was hardly any staining from the exhaust, and then you got other aircraft like the good old AH1. Well, what is the SPAD?
SPAD, yeah, yep.
Those things look at the side of the fuselage, just coated.
And then you got the Tornado from the English Tornado, which they use in Iraq.
Yeah.
And they've got the reverse thrusters, which sort of which is the afterburner. It sort of opens up, and then when they're coming into land for the short landing, it gets the whole back of the aircraft black.
Yeah.
It looks fantastic with this model.
Yeah. And also with a lot of exhaust staining, like I said, with the German stuff, I usually go very oily black consistency. Usually chuck a little bit of brown on the edges. Allies, I usually tend to go try and get a bit of grey, light grey in the middle of the exhaust staining, just to show the heat. That's
important. The first time I ever did that was in a 72 scale Corsair, and I did black first, and then I got grey right in the middle, and just started coming out of it. It really lifted it.
Yeah,
really did lift it. Yeah, it was fantastic.
Fading of the paint. So when you look at an aircraft, I mean, and the thing that sort of jumps out at me straight away is some of the aircraft used during the Vietnam War by the Americans. Certainly the aircraft used by the Greek Air Force, and how they're extremely weathered. And it's not just the weathering, but it's almost like a fading of the paint. So if you can imagine the paint being exposed to direct sunlight over a period of time, it will sort of slowly fade. So how do you go about getting those techniques?
Some colours fade more than others.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mattes fade very quickly. So thus matte paint.
Blues.
Yep.
Blues fade out really quick, and reds get brighter under sun, as the Australians found out during the beginning of the Second World War. So while the Australians dropped the red dot in the Roundel.
Yes.
The red got brighter, the blue disappeared, and all the people on the ground thought it was Japanese plane.
But going back to your question, weathering, I've got a MiG-29 sitting here. I know your listeners can't see it, but I've basically started weathering that whilst I was painting it, because I did a pre-shade. And basically for pre-shaders, I get black, because I work in acrylics, and I get it at low pressure on the airbrush, and I go around all the panel lines, the edges of the aircraft, around gun bays and any edges per se, and any panel lines. The plane looks a bit weird at the end because you've got the plastic and then you've got this black, funny-looking lines all over the place. And then you let that sit and then you start putting your paints, the colour on top of that. Mm-hmm. But when I paint an aircraft, I just don't paint it in like a car spray painter would spray a car by going from one end to the other. I would sort of build up individual panels per se. I might sort of cover over a whole wing and just get the colour even, but showing through the original pre-shade. And then I would build up areas with the airbrush. And it's a time-consuming process, but it really does look nice. And it's patchy, it looks nice. And once I've finished that with the all-over colour, say underneath camouflage or a single camouflage on top, when I start looking at the second colour or even the third colour for the camouflage, when you start putting that on, it gets rid of that pre-shade, which is a bit of a shame because you've got this really nice finish. But then I get the guns out again, the smoke. It's like a clear paint, and then I go over those panel lines again and then bring them back again, those darker areas. And that's how I keep those darker areas working. And then I might even add a different colour into that original camouflage as well, because it's being used in the Middle East. Those paints would fade a lot, so I would use a lighter colour and then start building up the middle of the panels. And if I'm feeling adventurous enough, I might even get a darker colour of that camouflage or the paint colour I'm using on the aircraft, and then build up the areas around the edges once more. So it's a developing process. It really is.
So and the thing with pre-shading too, let everyone know, don't use textures. So many times you've seen people get the Sharpie out and they go, oh, I'll do it with a Sharpie. It looks fantastic. You put your paint on, looks good. A week later or 2 weeks later, the Sharpie comes through your paint.
I actually did that as an experiment. I had an A4, an Airfix one. I got super cheap, so I thought, I'll do that. And I'll put the Sharpie on and I'll just see how bad it actually is. And it is bad. Yeah. Absolutely. It's shocking. Yeah. So you got pre-shading, or you can do post-shading.
And you can do both as well. Yeah, you can do... I do pre-shading and post-shading. And whilst doing the pre-shading and post-shading, like as I said before, I even put different colours in there as well.
And, of course, on top of that, we've got, when we're talking about aircraft, is the panel line fillers as well, which you can use to highlight the panel lines.
Yes, but you've got to be careful. Some people do every panel line, and you don't need to do every panel line. You only do the ones that are most like ailerons, landing flaps, compartments that are open daily for inspection. You can probably get away with the odd panel line on those. Everything else, like 72 scale aircraft, I don't see why people even do panel washes on those things. You look at an aircraft in the distance that's going to be 172 scale, you're not going to see any panel lines.
Yeah, that's true. It is a personal preference on weathering.
Yeah, because a lot of people do it, so it brings out the detail.
Yeah. And I like to do mine over light hand, my weathering. That's my personal preference. Yeah,
I tend to go pretty average with my aircraft, but I usually go a little bit overboard with my armour.
Well, armour, I think you can quite happily go overboard with it because, you know, it's just the environment they operate in. They're going to be a lot dirtier than the aircraft all the time.
Well, that's right,
Yeah.
Too true.
Adding to that as well, you can also use pastels. There's a technique I use as well, whereas I get some tape and I like to get with a lot of ailerons and flaps and so forth. And when you're sitting in a commercial jet and looking out in the wing, you can actually see a lot of grime coming out of these areas. So what I usually do is I like to get some tape. Make sure the tape, because you don't want to rip up the paint you've already got there, and make sure it's been sitting for, say, a week. So it's off-gassed, it's really, really dry. You can even, because I use Tamiya tape, I even sort of run it on my hand first and get the tackiness off, and then I just put it on there. You can even use Post-it notes, they work quite well, and just put it on the panel line. Now from that, you then get some pastels on a brush, and then brush over the tape or the Post-it note, and then brush back. and that gets like a grime coming out of these areas, out of these ailerons and these other areas like that, like air brakes and things like that, showing grime sort of coming out of there, and that works really nicely as well. Very, very simple technique.
I even saw on YouTube where a guy was demonstrating how he uses pencils. So
pencils.
he's painted the model up, and then just to go around and sort of weather the camouflage, he sort of chooses a different sort of shade of that particular colour and uses a pencil around the outline. And that seemed like quite a good method as well.
It all comes down to what you feel most comfortable with.
And experiment.
Yep.
Yeah, it does.
Just go and buy a cheap $10 kit and just use it as your experimental sort of model.
And being part of the club or going to an exhibition where you see these the kits displayed, and then you see a kit that you actually like and the techniques used, and then approach the modeler and then ask them, how did you do that? And they'll explain. Most of them are happy to explain the technique they used, and you learn from that as well. So it's always good.
You never stop learning.
Never stop learning. Well, I really hope you enjoyed that flashback. Certainly, I found it very interesting listening to the old studio that we used to have, and gee, it's made a heck of a difference moving to the new place and the equipment as well. Got a much better sound quality now. But anyway, not to worry. We'll be back with our regular programming just as soon as I get back from being away. In the meantime, don't forget to pop over and have a listen to our fellow colonialists in Canada, the Scale Model Podcast. They've got a great show over there, and it gives the chance for you, the listener, to get your modelling fix with one podcast per week. They put a podcast out one week, and we put ours out on the other week. So certainly drop by and give them a listen. Thanks very much for all the emails and the comments that you've been sending to us. We love hearing from you guys on Facebook, or even better, you can send us an email. And, of course, our email address is onthebench64@gmail.com. If you've got anything you want to talk about, post it on Facebook. There's a really friendly sort of environment there. And as I said, if you got any sort of thoughts or considerations in regards to how we can perhaps improve the show, by all means, drop us a line on our Gmail email address. So that's it for this very different and unusual show. As I said, I hope you can bear with us, but we'll be resuming normal programming as soon as I return. Thanks very much.